In need of a good read or just want to keep up with the books everyone's talking about? NPR's Book of the Day podcast gives you today's very best writing in a pocket-sized show. Whether you're looking to engage with the big questions of our times or temporarily escape from them, we've got an author who'll speak to you. Catch today's great books in 15 minutes or less on the Book of the Day podcast, only from NPR.
Hey, it's Tali, here to tell you about the podcast Israel Story. Now, more than ever, Israel is a tough topic. Some love it, others hate it, but Israel Story offers a nuanced, faithful window into the extraordinary stories of everyday people in Israel. Beautiful and ugly, tragic and inspiring, ridiculous and heartwarming. Check out hundreds of timeless episodes in their back catalog or dive into the 65 Wartime Diaries episodes capturing slivers of life right now. Hear voices from soldiers to survivors, farmers to rabbis, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and connect with this complicated, amazing place. Hosted by Mishi Harman and produced with the Jerusalem Foundation and the Times of Israel, find Israel Story wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to The 5 Books, where each week we talk with a Jewish author about 5 books that are near and dear to them. My name is Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Every week, I ask Jewish authors about 5 books in 5 categories. We'll hear about 2 Jewish books that have impacted the author's Jewish identity. We'll hear about 1 book, not necessarily Jewish, that they think everyone should read, a book that changed their worldview. We'll get a peek into what book the author is reading now, and we'll get to hear about the new book they've just published and how it came about. Today, we'll be talking with Zibby Owens about the collection of essays she edited called On Being Jewish Now. In this collection, 75 contributors reflect on what it means to be Jewish and how life has changed since the attacks of October 7th. Authors and advocates write about Jewish joy, celebration, laughter, food, trauma, loss, love, and family, and the common threads that course through the Jewish people: resilience and humor. On Being Jewish Now is edited by Zibby Owens. Zibby is the best-selling author of the recent novel Blank, 3 anthologies, a children's book, and the 2022 memoir Bookends, which touches on the loss of her best friend and college roommate on 9/11, and how she eventually found herself in books. Zibby is also the CEO of Zibby Media, which includes a publishing house, a bookstore, the award-winning daily podcast Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, which she hosts, Zibby's Book Club, and Zibby's Retreats for book lovers. In our interview, Zibby will reflect on how Night by Elie Wiesel impacted her.
When I think back on that time, it was just a piece of an otherwise pretty rosy middle school that never left my consciousness.
She will share how reading and writing memoir have changed her perspective.
It woke me up to the power of writing through trauma, writing through difficult things, and how powerful that could be.
And she will talk about what the last year has been like for her as a powerful advocate for Jewish authors.
I hadn't gone through life in any way like meeting new Jewish people. It's opened up all these new experiences and relationships and made me examine who I am and what this piece of my life means to me.
That's all coming up next. Hi, Zibby.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me on the 5 Books. I'm so thrilled to talk to you today about your new book On Being Jewish Now.
Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
Thanks for coming. So I know you have taken on the publishing world at a breakneck speed. I think it's in the last 6 years, right? You've started your podcast, your publishing company. You've published 3 books. I know you've done author retreats. I'm sure I'm missing more. You opened a bookstore. So in that, I know you've certainly owned your Jewish identity, but it hasn't been a feature. So, and then in the last year since 10/7, you've really become a tremendous voice and advocate for Jewish voices, for Jewish authors, for Jewish stories. What has that been like for you stepping into that?
It felt like such an obvious decision that it almost didn't feel like a decision. After 10/7, I was so stunned, shocked, horrified, all of it. And it quickly seeped in, the anti-Semitism sort of festering here in the United States, that was like the second shock after the attack itself, quickly entered into my day-to-day life in many ways and throughout the publishing industry and through books and through so many other ways that I felt like I had to tell everybody, like, look at what's going on. Oh my gosh. So obviously, I felt like it was an obvious thing to do, to post in support of, our hearts go out to Israel and everybody affected. Like, of course. Little did I know that was a controversial position, to empathize with a country that was massacred. Crazy. So I feel like when you have a platform, which I didn't used to have, obviously, as you mentioned, this is all kind of new, I feel like part of the responsibility of that is to advocate and use it for good. I mean, I'm really trying to do all of this for good, is the genesis of the whole thing, but how could I not speak out? So yes, it hadn't been, I felt like I hadn't been needed, right? Like everything was fine. Everything was just not really fine now that I know, and now that I've learned much more. But on the surface, it seemed like books needed my help more than the Jewish people. So that's where most of my focus went. But I wasn't ignoring it. I mean, while I wasn't at work, I was at Hebrew school with the kids and high holidays and lighting candles and Shabbat. And, I was doing all the things as part of who I am. When I wrote Blank, my novel that came out this year, oh my gosh, my main character was Jewish, and there was a whole thing with the Hebrew school teacher, and her dog's name was Dena, and of course she was Jewish because, like, I'm Jewish. It didn't even occur to me not to. So these things just felt like foregone conclusions, and the escalation of speaking out has been one thing snowballing into another, and being in a position where I see so much, and therefore have to call it out much more than if you hadn't seen as much of the negatives.
I know so many people are so grateful to have your voice and have you using your platform in that way. So tell me about what sparked the decision to turn all of that into this book on being Jewish now.
Well, as I said, I was speaking up the whole course of the year. And whatever I did, whether it was an Instagram post or a controversial decision to pull out of the National Book Awards or something, nothing made a difference, it felt like. I mean, maybe yes, in the moment people said, thank you, I appreciate you speaking out, whatever. But I'm like, this is not what I'm trying, like, how can we make a difference? Is there anything we can do? Because I have trouble sitting with this feeling of powerlessness and hopelessness, and there must be something. Like, I'm optimistic in that way. I always feel like there's a way to make things better, but I just haven't figured out what it is. And one thing that happened soon after October 7th is that I joined up with 30 other Jewish women authors at the request of Alison Hammer, who was starting up Artists Against Anti-Semitism. And did I want to join? And I said, yes, of course. So I joined up with these women who have since become people I feel really close to, and we have been in this group chat all year, and I've heard a lot that I probably would never have heard, things that they experienced in their book tours or through their publishers or through their children who are all different ages, and they're in different places in the world and all of that. And in June of this past summer, it was a bad news day. I don't know what was happening, but it was just another moment. And I realized nothing is ever going to change because of what I have to say about things. No one's going to change their mind about Jewish people because of what a Jewish person has to say about that. And so two things became clear. One was that I had to join forces and hopefully join a chorus of voices all speaking together to try to elevate, speak louder, make more of a difference. And also that I really wanted to reach allies, people like Emmanuel Acho, who I had on my podcast. There are some very vocal, kind, motivated people who are speaking out. And I had published 2 other anthologies, not published them, but edited them. So I knew how to do an anthology. And in this case, I had started a publishing house. So actually I realized I could just publish this book, even though we don't publish books like this. We do fiction and memoir. But like the infrastructure was set up and it was my company. I'm like, well, maybe we could do it. So I thought of the idea for the anthology. I pitched it to this group in the group chat, and everybody was like, yes, we'll help, of course. And then I called Anne Massetti, who I work with, who's the publisher, and she has like 25 years of experience. And I was like, I know this isn't like on our schedule, but can we slot this in? And she was like, of course, we'll make it work. So this tiny team of us off on the side did the whole thing, and I edited all the essays this summer, and then I was in the closet recording audiobook sections and working with all the authors, pitching the authors. We went out to 200 people to write essays, and 75 said yes. So it came from a place of wanting to help, wanting to share stories, and hopefully making a difference by showing the joy of being Jewish, who we are, the culture, the differences between us, both in race and location and backgrounds and everything else, but that what unites us are these shared values and everything else. And I just hoped that maybe people reading it would think, oh, look, they're great people.
Book 1, A Jewish Book from Childhood, Night by Elie Wiesel.
My parents came from different Jewish backgrounds. My dad was raised conservative in a Philadelphia suburb and was quite observant. My mother came from a Dayton, Ohio family that was very assimilated, and their family had come from Germany, and they had a Christmas tree. I'll just put it that way, and didn't want anything to be too obvious markers. However, of being Jewish. However, and she was not bat mitzvahed and all of that, but being Jewish was very important to them, just not necessarily showing that they were Jewish. So when they got married, my mother kind of won. We had a Christmas tree, which is crazy now looking back on it. And yet I went to Hebrew school. I felt, I starred as Anne Frank in the Diary of Anne Frank. I was very, I felt very identified as Jewish. I did go to a school where I was one of only a few Jewish people from K through 8. And so I was very aware of the fact that I was Jewish and what that meant and how that made me different. And it was just part of who I was. I got bat mitzvahed. I was confirmed. It was just part of who I was. And then I got married, and my ex-husband now came from a family more like my dad's family when he married my mom. And so the pendulum swung back. We were having Shabbat dinners on Fridays and all of that. And the idea of having a Christmas tree was verboten. So it was just part of my life.
Yeah. And so at what point did you read Night?
I read Night in Hebrew school. And I feel like we read it every year. This might not be true, but in my memory, I remember talking to my good friend Lauren at Hebrew school being like, why don't we read this every year? Why do we learn the same things every year? What, are we going to learn anything else? And it was through learning individual stories and experiences and the horrors of the Holocaust and what happened that I became kind of obsessed with Holocaust stories and learning about it. I feel like I have read 8 million books about the Holocaust, historical fiction, nonfiction. In college, I did I took Jewish studies in college and did a whole study on grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. I just couldn't stop watching movies about it. Not so dissimilar, probably from many other Jewish people who just can't believe the horror. So that became something sort of intellectually and emotionally that I became quite focused on and still am.
The Holocaust was not part of your family's stories.
It was not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you were probably in middle school the first time you read it?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, is it a book your kids have read?
No, but one of my kids recently at school is like, I'm reading a comic book, about a mouse or something. And I was like, oh my gosh. So they have not read it. They should though. And I'll try to make sure that happens. Of course, I can't get them to do anything. So.
Understood. Is there anything from Night that sticks with you, or any part of it that you sort of?
Not anything specific. And to be honest, I have not reread it in years. But when I think back on that time, I can see the cover. I feel like it was always on my desk. It was just a piece of an otherwise pretty rosy middle school that never left my consciousness.
It struck me, one of the quotes that Elie Wiesel is famous for is, "Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must intervene." So I just think there's a lovely echo of all that you've been trying to do with what his life's work was really all about. And I wanted to ask you what kind of books you were drawn to as a kid. What were you generally reading?
As a kid, I read everything I could. Not always the most literary. Like, I read anything, like, in middle school with, like, an illustration on the front of, like, a middle school girl with, like, the Sweet Valley High hair, and, like, maybe she's on the phone, and like Norma Klein and Judy Blume, as I mentioned, Beverly Cleary when I was younger, all the greats. I don't know. I do read historical fiction, but that's a tiny sliver of, like, my overall reading. Mostly I like to read contemporary fiction and memoir as a guide, almost. Like, what are people going through right now? Once I put the book down, how does this change my day going forward? So I liked to read about other girls or some boys and men and whatever as I got older, contemporary, about their experiences and their emotional lives.
On Death, Sex, and Money, we feature interviews with you, our community of listeners, getting honest about uncomfortable things.
I developed an illness where it isn't safe for me to drive. A friend once said to me, "Sex is like air. You don't think about it until you're not getting enough." This is a similar sort of thing if you just replace sex with driving.
Listen to Death, Sex, and Money wherever you get podcasts.
Book 2, A Jewish Book from Adulthood, 10-7 by Lee Aron.
So there could have been many, many answers to this question, but having recently read and interviewed Lee Aron about her book 10-7, I learned so much more about Israel, the history of Israel. I have to admit, I have not been to Israel, which I am really embarrassed about right now. Every time we were going to go, like, something terrible was going on. And I'm also someone who, like, doesn't like to leave my house for almost anything. And if there is a threat of anything anywhere, I'm like, I'm just going to stay home. I'm good here. Thank you. So I'm very risk averse. And anyway, Lee Aron's book, written from a journalist standpoint about everything that happened on October 7th, all the different ways the people in the book and in Israel were interrelated, all of the experiences, the horror, the widespreadness of it. I mean, I think there is a misconception here that 10-7 was an attack on a music festival, you know, similar to, like, the Vegas shooting out the window, which of course is not what happened. And it was much more pervasive than that. And it was this enormous coordinated attack, things that you just, like, can't believe. And Lee writes about it in such a stark way that you feel like you were there, that you can see the flowered sweater of a elderly woman at a bus stop before she gets murdered. I mean, so the images in the book, just for me, and the book itself, are a symbol of the turning point 10-7 has made in my adult life, and how there is such a before and after, similar to 9/11 was a huge turning point. And in that case, I was directly affected. In this case, I didn't know anybody. So I feel like I'm not trying to claim it as anything related to me personally, but just in terms of how I feel about the world, those two things feel like somehow bookends on my experience.
I know that she speaks to different communities that are impacted, and I'm just curious if there's a particular community or story that sticks with you.
There was this group of older people who were going to the beach, and two sisters who were there, and the bus broke down at some point. They ended up, like, in this intermediate stop and got murdered, and then left out there on the street as other people watched through their windows at home, hiding and fearing for their own safety. And then their bodies were just like left on the street, having been mowed down by Hamas. These elderly people just like heading down for a day at the beach. I don't know. It just, in my mind, is such a clear example of the insanity and brutality. Like, why?
Book 3, a book that changed your worldview. Drinking, a Love Story by Caroline Knapp.
So, Drinking a Love Story, and also, by the way, Slow Motion by Dani Shapiro. These were two of the very first memoirs that I really ever read. I grew up reading fiction and nonfiction for school and all of that, but I would read my mom's Judith Krantz books and multi-generational sagas and, I don't know, whatever was around. Marjorie Morningstar, Judy Blume, I mean, all of that. But until I read Caroline Knapp and Dani Shapiro, really, I didn't realize that you could, and I also loved writing personal essays myself. So my first personal essay I wrote when I was 14 that got published in 17 magazine. So I have always written sort of from the heart, very openly about things that I don't think are fair or things that I feel. Like that first essay was about when I gained a bunch of weight after my parents got a divorce and then felt like people were treating me differently and the mean things people said. And then I ended up losing the weight. And I mean, that could be like 57 podcasts worth, but I'm not going there. But when I see something going on, I like to talk about it and write about it in a way that makes other people feel like they can see it. So anyway, when Caroline Knapp wrote about her drinking and saying things like people who don't have drinking problems don't go to bed late at night worrying about if they have drinking problems or not. Some things about her experience just stuck with me so much. Her struggle to control something that was uncontrollable, her identification of a problem, but not necessarily knowing what the solution was, feeling sort of different than colleagues because she was hiding something, the power of secrets. All of these things turned me on to memoir itself, woke me up to the power of writing through trauma, writing through difficult things in book form and how powerful that could be. When Caroline Knapp died, I cried. Like, I never met her, but I read that book. I read every book that, I read the book she wrote about her dog. And I just kept, if there had been Instagram then, I would have been like her biggest fan on Instagram and liking every post. And I felt that sense of loss. Like I knew her, which of course I didn't, but I kind of did.
So how old were you when you read this book?
I was in college. I want to say I was in college. And by the way, I was drinking a lot in college and like I did, like many people in college, but, I don't know, her, like I still think about it when I go out to dinner and how she wrote about sneaking, like refilling her wine glass and were other people noticing how much she was grabbing the bottle and refilling it. How long would she have to wait before she did it again? And I read this book so long ago. It just is one of those things that has stuck with me so much.
And is that around when you started writing? Or I guess you said you published your first essay when you were 14 already, so you would already had that in you. Is that when you started sort of thinking about doing more writing, or that was already in your thoughts?
It was in my thoughts, but I had always wanted to write a novel, and it was that book, along with Dani Shapiro's book as well. I feel like they went hand in hand for me, but it was then that I wanted to write a memoir at some point. Because I also thought before that memoirs were sweeping histories, like autobiographies, and that's not it. You can write a memoir about, you can write a whole memoir about a summer or one experience. It's a deep dive into a piece of life. It doesn't have to be your whole life. And that felt extremely powerful to me.
And tell me about Slow Motion.
Slow Motion by Dani Shapiro, who is one of my favorite authors, truly. Her book Inheritance was so amazing. Signal Fires. I just love her. Slow Motion was another one, but that was about coming to grips with who she was, her relationship with her parents, and what happened after this sort of horrific car accident that her parents were in. And her father died, and her mother was very injured, and she was dating someone really inappropriate for her at the time, and an abusive-ish relationship with like this much older man, and her life was out of control, and she was struggling to get it back under wraps. So I think there's something about when I'm in a period of time, which was sort of the coming of age time in my life where I didn't know where things were headed. And I don't like that. I very much like things to be set. Even if I change the plans, I like them set so I know where it's going. And both of these women were just smart, sensitive, amazing women who had periods of time where their lives were out of control and they were able to wrestle them back and then write beautifully about them. And so they both just left me with this feeling of hope and knowing that no matter what comes next or whatever difficulty I was going through, there would be a way to wrestle it back in and that writing might be a path forward.
And then it did take you a while then before you actually started writing your memoir, right?
Yes. I wrote a memoir for the first time after business school, which I then turned into a novel. But I wrote it like 4 different ways, start to finish, one of which was a memoir. But I never tried to sell. Well, I showed it to like 2 people who thought it was terrible and barely recovered from that. So then I turned it into a novel and got an agent, and that also didn't sell. They said it was because it was about 9/11 and it was so close, no one wanted to read fiction about it. Maybe they were just being nice. I should really go back and read it. It was probably terrible. But it did then take me until, 2022, until I wrote Bookends, which was much, much later.
Book 4, the book you're reading now. Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty.
So I just finished Liane Moriarty's Here One Moment, which I found fascinating because it involves an airplane full of people randomly thrown together and a woman who goes through the aisle pointing at each person individually and saying how and when they will die. And then what happens after as the predictions start coming true, and what happens to society, free will, fate, all these really big questions. And as someone who sits on airplanes and like wonders, like I'm always wondering about people, hopefully not in like a creepy way, but actually I interviewed Liane about it yesterday, and she said she was stuck on an airplane without a book and started looking around at everybody, just wondering. And because of her own health issues, she started thinking, well, everybody on this plane is going to die. I wonder how. Like at some point we will know the answer to this. There could be like a list of how and when everybody died, but now we don't know. What could they be and what if they knew? Anyway, I found this whole concept really fascinating and different and thought-provoking. And it took me a while to read it. Usually I fly through books, but there were so many different characters and different storylines and whatever that I ended up reading it really slowly, but then somehow like getting a little more out of it. I can't totally explain it, but I feel like it's almost like I just took a course in like self-determination or something. So that was really good.
That makes sense to me. I feel like so from what I have read of yours, that idea of like, we don't know how much time we have left and sort of make the most of it seems to be very central to your ethos.
Yes. Thank you.
So
Thank you for noticing that. That is how I feel.
Book 5, the author's latest book, On Being Jewish Now, edited by Zibby Owens. Okay, so we get to talk about your book On Being Jewish Now, which is a compilation of essays by a huge array of writers and also some non-writers. So I just to pick up on the thread that we started talking about earlier, you have made some pretty big decisions. You withdrew your company's support from the National Book Award in 2023. You've been proudly Jewish on your social media. I know you've been the target of some anti-Semitic harassment. Does it get to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it gets to me. Some of the like random comments on Instagram don't get to me when it's somebody free Palestine, like whatever. It's the things that get to me the most are the betrayal of people that I know, or authors like who have been on the podcast, or authors withdrawing from the podcast, or speaking out, or posting so much anti-Semitic vitriol like on there. And I'm like, I cannot believe you feel this way. Like we had a whole relationship, I felt, I don't know. It's blown my mind. So,
And have they sort of reached out to you personally? Have you had conversations with them or no? No.
Mm-mm. Once that happens, I'm just like, no. They're like, no. Not like close friends. I know a lot of people have had close friends who now have a huge rift in their relationship. Fortunately, my friends, I don't, but a lot in the community at large, yes. And yeah, I mean, I was on some of those lists on Twitter going around of blacklisting Jewish authors. Like, it's scary. You know, there's been some scary stuff where I've, like, had to contact security people and, you know, I worry. But then I look to others who are sort of leading and speaking out, and so far so good, knock wood, you know. I don't know, I feel like so far the risk is okay. I don't know, but I never know.
Yeah, as someone who describes yourself as risk averse,
I know.
It's pretty brave to continue going about it and doing it every day.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going on like the Tower of Terror at Disney World, but I can write and post about how I feel about what's going on in the world. I mean, things happen to me literally every day. I'm sure to you too. But I mean, I just went to a book signing for On Being Jewish Now. And when I got there, the person was like, oh, wait, we have to call our social media manager to come down to take pictures because we do that for all the authors who come in. I was like, oh, that's so nice. Okay, of course. And then the social media manager came down, and my husband was with me, and I didn't notice at the time, but I guess she was wearing, you know, Palestinian flag stuff all over her. And she just stood there. And I was like, oh, you know, can I sign now? You know, weren't you here to like take my picture? Like, do you want to do that later? And she was like, oh, I don't need to take a picture. It's fine. And I was like, oh, I thought you were the social media person. And she was like, yeah, you know, you can just post and just tag us and I'll put it in stories. And I was like, oh, okay. Thinking, why does she need to come down here then? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just collab with the store or whatever. And she's like, oh, no, don't collab. Just put it in stories. And I was like, okay. And then we left. And then my husband was like, did you notice that? And I was like, no, I didn't notice that. And then, of course, I posted and it was not added to stories. But another author had come in who had a very different type of book and a different background and position on this whole thing. And that author got a full post and feed. Mm-hmm. So these things happen like literally every day. Every day there's something.
So disheartening. I understand this impetus to raise Jewish voices, and I'm just curious what you were hoping for in having these authors and others reflect on their Judaism. Who were you hoping would read the book? What were you hoping they would take away from it?
So as I was on my book tour for Blank, which started this past March, I would meet people at all the events, Jewish women in particular, who would take me aside sort of at the end or whisper and just say, like, thank you for speaking out. And a lot of them would get very emotional. There were a lot of hugs. I would get emotional. They were like, thank you. And I just kept thinking about all those people everywhere who needed something so much, and just everybody who has been sort of collectively sitting Shiva on their screens and not feeling a deeper sense of connection. I just want to help everybody, show them all of these experiences and thoughts and feelings of so many others, and also invigorate them. And we have so much to be proud of and so much to protect and all of that. So yes, I want Jewish people to read it, of course, and give it as Hanukkah gifts and, you know, whatever, because it speaks to what we are like today, or a couple months ago, which a contributor recently said, well, now I already feel totally different. It should be like On Being Jewish now, and now, and now, and now, you know, which is why actually I started a Substack On Being Jewish Now, and people write for the Substack and submit essays so we can get like real time. I also want allies to read it and just know what it's like people who are curious about the human experience in general, which is why so many people read and why we read books and why I have read books my whole life about a lot of different groups, and why I love learning about different cultures and different experiences and religions, races, sexualities, all of it. I think it's important that we all know what we're going through as we, you know, go through the revolving door of life together and realize, like, wow, this is a really interesting, historic race, and how wonderful. Look at them. Go, go, go.
Are these conversations that you're having with your kids at home?
We talk about this a lot at home. I mean, I have to say, at one point, I was considering speaking out on something that I ended up not speaking out about publicly, which I still think is the right decision, but I think it would have put me at some personal risk, so I decided not to do it. And as I was talking to the kids about it, because it was sort of a family decision we would have to make, and finally one of my kids was like, can't someone else's mom be the one speaking up about this? Like, do you have to do everything here? So I do take that into account. But my daughters wear star necklaces and they don't want to put them away. They have been even more proud. I'm so proud of them, like in all their own ways, and my other kids too, and my sons in different ways are very public about who they are and how much this means to them, which I'm so proud of, and also want to protect them and make sure they're okay. And, it's a tricky time to be a parent. It always is, but we're all on the same page, even my brother. I mean, I feel like it's brought our whole extended family together even more.
What feels meaningful to you about being Jewish right now?
Everything, but really other Jewish people. I mean, I had been going through life, most recently feeling connected to people in the literary world, right? This whole past stage of life, I've met so many amazing authors and people in publishing and this whole world, and that's been eye-opening for me as a lifelong book lover. But I hadn't gone through life in any way like meeting new Jewish people. So this has just brought me here. I mean, look, you and me, here we are. Like it's opened up all these new experiences and relationships and made me examine who I am and what this piece of my life means to me. My husband converted to Judaism, my second husband, like we are all in, and it's meaningful to me to be part of this community, and how proud I am of all of the resilience and contributions to society and the values. Like Jewish values are so great, giving back, helping, tikkun olam. So I'm just happy to be a part of it.
I love the positive take on it. I think for me, it's been a year. It keeps feeling like I should have had my brain wrapped around what's going on in a different way, and yet every day still feels surprising, and I feel like it's still reorienting our world in ways that we haven't fully processed yet. So, having these sort of like artifacts of where we are at a particular moment is really meaningful. And who knows where we'll be in a year from now. To be able to look back on that, I think is really valuable. I do want to ask you, we've touched on this. You've written about loss and anxiety, depression, challenging times. What, outside of being Jewish, what are the other things that bring you joy?
My kids, when they're not bringing me pain. No, I'm kidding. Books bring me so much joy. I know that sounds pathetic because I talk about books so much, but like this is actually my biggest passion in life is reading. So I get so much enjoyment out of books. I mean, literally, I'm like, shouldn't I be watching TV or something? Like, I need to like get into a new show or something. But my family brings me immense joy. My husband, spending time with him, he makes me laugh like every day. And, chocolate cake.
All good things. All good things. You reflect in your memoir, you talk about yourself as a book messenger. You're someone who delivers the right books to the right people at the right time. And I think On Being Jewish Now is that book that's delivered to the right people and at the right time. So thank you so much for bringing it to all of us. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you for being so prepared and doing such a lovely interviewing job. You were really good.
That means a lot coming from you.
No, you really are. This is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 5 books. Our guest today was Zibby Owens, talking about her inspiring anthology of essays on being Jewish now. You can find a link to the book and all of the books she talks about in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe and share with friends and family. I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Our producer is Odelia Rubin. Music by Dove Rosenblatt and Blue Dot Sessions. Art by Dena Friedman. A special thanks to the Jewish Book Council, Morgan Swift, and Jeff Umbro.